The captain's voice came over the cabin speakers, calm and clipped, and said a name that did not belong to any passenger on the manifest. When he didn't get an answer, he said it again. Slower this time, the way people do when they believe silence means guilt. Every head in the cabin turned, and the woman in the grey coat felt the pressure land on her chest like a hand. The jet was still on the ground at Morristown Municipal, rain tapping the fuselage in a steady, impatient rhythm. The lights inside were low, amber, expensive. Leather seats, real wood trim. The kind of quiet that only exists when money has paid for the absence of noise. The woman sat near the aisle, not in the front, not in the back, hands folded in her lap, breathing measured, eyes forward. Her name was Naomi Carter. That was the name on her ID. It was also the name she had learned to answer to without flinching. She felt it before she saw it. The shift in air, the way people leaned away just a fraction, as if trouble were contagious. The flight attendant paused mid-step. Someone coughed. The engines were still silent, but the plane felt like it was already moving, sliding towards something no one could stop. Captain Harold Briggs stepped out of the cockpit. 65. Broad shoulders gone slightly soft, hair clipped short, white at the temples. He carried himself like a man who had spent his life being listened to. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He let the stripes on his shoulders do that work for him. His eyes scanned the cabin, efficient, practiced. When they landed on Naomi, they lingered. Not on her face, on her coat, her shoes, the way her purse rested at her feet instead of tucked neatly under the seat like everyone else's. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am," he said, stopping beside her row. "I need to speak with you." Naomi looked up slowly. She met his eyes without challenge, without apology.
"Yes, Captain."
The word captain flickered something behind his expression. Satisfaction. Authority recognized. He nodded once. "Please step into the galley with me." She didn't move right away. She could feel every set of eyes drilling into her back. The older man across the aisle, wedding ring polished thin from decades of wear, watched her with something like pity. The younger woman 2 rows up had already pulled out her phone, screen dark but ready. "Is there a problem?" Naomi asked. Briggs smiled, tight and professional. "There seems to be a discrepancy." A discrepancy. The word hung between them, vague and loaded. Naomi stood, smoothing her coat, careful not to rush. As she followed him forward, she noticed the flight attendant's hands shaking as she pretended to rearrange a stack of napkins that didn't need rearranging. The galley was narrow, bright, all stainless steel and sharp corners. Briggs turned to face her, arms crossed, filling the space. Up close, she could smell his aftershave, something old-fashioned and assertive. "You weren't on the original charter list," he said. "You were added late." "That's correct," Naomi said, "through the booking office." He nodded. "And yet your name triggered a hold when we ran our final clearance." Her pulse ticked up, but her face remained still. "What kind of hold?" "A background verification issue." He said it like a verdict. "This is a private charter under corporate contract. That gives us discretion." "Discretion," Naomi repeated softly. Behind them, the cabin door opened briefly as ground staff moved cargo. Cold air rushed in, then vanished. Somewhere outside, a truck backfired. Naomi thought of her father, years ago, telling her that power often announced itself as concern. "I've flown private before," she said. "This has never happened." Briggs leaned closer. "Then you should know that cooperation makes things go smoother." There it was. Not a threat, an invitation to submit. "What are you asking me to do?" Naomi said. "I'm asking you to deplane while we sort this out. There's another aircraft leaving in the morning. Morning. The word landed heavy. Naomi glanced past him, through the narrow opening, and saw the rain streaking sideways across the tarmac. She imagined the call she would miss, the room full of people who would fill the silence she left behind. No, she said. Briggs straightened. Excuse me. I'm not leaving this aircraft, Naomi said. My documents are valid. If there's an issue, you can explain it to my attorney. That did it. The smile vanished. Briggs's eyes hardened, not angry yet, but offended. He turned slightly, angling his body so that anyone watching could see who held the space. Ma'am, you are delaying departure. A man's voice cut in from behind them. Is everything all right up here? It belonged to Victor Langley, late 50s, impeccably dressed. The kind of man who smelled faintly of cedar and confidence. He stood just inside the galley, one hand braced on the wall, the other holding a phone he hadn't bothered to put away. Captain, Langley said, glancing at Naomi like she was a piece of luggage left unattended. We're already behind schedule. Briggs's shoulders eased. Mr. Langley, we're handling a minor issue. Langley's gaze sharpened. Is she the issue? Naomi felt the word hit her like a slap, quick and clean. There was a hold on her clearance, Briggs said. I've asked her to step off. Langley exhaled, annoyed. For God's sake. He turned to Naomi. Look, I don't know who you are, but some of us have places to be. Naomi looked at him then. Really looked. The expensive watch, the faint tremor in his fingers, the eyes that had learned how to look past people instead of at them. So do I, she said. Langley laughed once, sharp. Captain, fix this. Briggs nodded. He turned back to Naomi, his voice dropping. This isn't a debate. Naomi felt the room tilt, just slightly. The old fear stirred, the one she had spent years teaching herself to recognize and set aside. She took a breath, slow, deliberate. I'm staying, she said. Briggs stared at her, incredulous. You don't get to decide that. Behind him, the flight attendant made a small sound, barely audible, like a warning she didn't know how to voice. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming harder now, as if the sky itself were impatient. The engines were still silent, the cabin still. Waiting. Briggs straightened his jacket. Then he reached for the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth again, practiced. We're experiencing a brief delay due to a compliance matter. Please remain seated. Naomi watched his thumb hover, then pressed the button off. He turned back to her, eyes cold. You can walk off on your own, he said quietly. Or we can do this another way. Somewhere deep in the aircraft, a system chimed. Not loud, just enough to be noticed. Briggs frowned, glancing toward the cockpit. Naomi said nothing. She held his gaze, steady as stone. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in the cabin, in him. A flicker of uncertainty, small, dangerous. He didn't know it yet, but the plane had already stopped being his. And every person watching, holding their breath, felt it too. The chime sounded again, longer this time, a low, deliberate tone that did not belong to passenger alerts or seatbelt reminders. Captain Briggs felt it in his teeth before he understood it with his mind. He turned sharply toward the cockpit, irritation flashing into something closer to unease. What was that? Victor Langley asked, his confidence cracking just enough to show the strain underneath. A system check, Briggs said automatically, though he hadn't ordered one. He didn't like surprises. He had built his entire career on controlling variables, weather, fuel, people. Naomi Carter remained still. She didn't look toward the cockpit. She didn't reach for her phone. She simply stood there, hands relaxed at her sides, as if she were waiting for an elevator rather than the judgment of a room full of strangers. The first officer's voice came faintly from the cockpit, filtered through the half-closed door. "Captain, we've got a flag on the operations console." Briggs felt heat rise in his chest. "What kind of flag?" "Operations priority override," the first officer said. "It just came in through dispatch. They want us to hold position." Briggs turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. Dispatch did not override him without explanation. Not ever. He looked back at Naomi, searching her face now, really searching, as if the answer might be written there. "Did you do something?" he asked. Naomi tilted her head slightly. "I made a call." Langley scoffed. "Oh, come on. To who? Your lawyer?" Naomi didn't answer him. Her gaze stayed on Briggs. "I asked for a compliance review. That's all." Briggs laughed once, short and humorless. "You don't trigger an operations hold with a phone call." The flight attendant in the galley swallowed. "Captain," she said quietly, "dispatch is on line 2. Briggs snatched the handset from its cradle and turned his back on Naomi. "This is Briggs." There was a pause. Then a voice, calm, measured, female, carrying the weight of procedure. "Captain Briggs, this is Linda Morales with Corporate Flight Operations. We need you to pause all boarding activities and remain at the gate." Briggs clenched his jaw. "On what grounds?" "Pending verification of a late-stage charter amendment," Morales said. "Legal and safety review." Langley threw his hands up. "This is ridiculous." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Harold, you can't let this derail the flight. You know who I am." Briggs covered the receiver. "I'm handling this." He turned slightly away, his voice dropping. "Linda, there is a passenger refusing a lawful instruction." There was another pause. Longer this time. "Captain," Morales said, "I'm going to advise you to refrain from escalating any passenger interactions until review is complete." "Advise?" Briggs repeated. That word again. Soft, slippery. "Yes, Captain. Advise." The line went dead. Briggs stared at the handset as if it had betrayed him. He felt the cabin behind him, the weight of attention, the quiet hum of expectation. When he turned back, Langley's face was flushed, his composure thinning. "This is unacceptable," Langley said. "I have commitments in London." "So does she," Briggs snapped, surprising himself with the sharpness in his voice. Langley blinked. "What?" Briggs looked at Naomi again. For the first time, his eyes went to her face fully. The lines around her mouth, the calm in her eyes that didn't waver. He saw now what he had missed before. Not defiance. Certainty. "Who are you?" he asked. Naomi didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the cabin, where passengers pretended not to listen while listening to every word. She thought of the years she had spent choosing when to speak, and when silence did more work. "I'm someone who believes rules matter," she said, "especially when they're inconvenient." Langley laughed again, but it sounded thinner now. "You don't look like anyone I've ever met who mattered." The words landed hard. The flight attendant inhaled sharply. Somewhere in the cabin, a man muttered, "Jesus." Naomi felt the old reflex rise, the urge to explain, to justify. She let it pass. "You're right," she said. "I don't look like what you expect." Briggs felt something cold settle in his stomach. Expectations. He had built a life on them. Another chime sounded, this one unmistakable. The secure channel alert. Briggs turned back toward the cockpit just as the first officer opened the door wider, his face pale. "Captain," he said, "Legal is requesting you stand down from further passenger directives until they arrive on site." "Arrive?" Briggs echoed. They're already en route, the first officer said. Airport compliance team and corporate counsel. The cabin shifted. Murmurs rippled, low and restrained. Langley took a step back, his phone now in his hand, fingers moving fast. This is getting out of hand, he muttered. Naomi watched him. She saw the calculation behind his eyes, the way power recalibrated when it sensed resistance. Briggs straightened, drawing himself up to his full height. This aircraft is under my command, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Naomi met his gaze, not unkindly, not triumphantly, just steadily. For now. The words hit him harder than any accusation could have. Time stretched. The rain outside softened to a mist. The engines remained silent, obedient to a pause no one in the cabin could override. From the front windows, flashing lights reflected faintly off wet concrete. Not police. Compliance vehicles. The kind that didn't rush, but always arrived. Langley noticed them too. His mouth tightened. He leaned toward Briggs. You're going to let this woman turn your cockpit into a courtroom? Briggs didn't answer. He was watching Naomi again. Watching the way she breathed, the way she held herself. Not like someone bracing for impact, but like someone who had already survived it. The flight attendant cleared her throat. Captain, would you like me to offer refreshments while we wait? Wait. The word felt foreign. Yes, Briggs said finally. Do that. As she moved away, Naomi caught her eye and gave the smallest nod. Gratitude, not victory. Langley exhaled sharply. This is unbelievable. Naomi looked at him. You might want to sit down. He bristled. Don't tell me what to do. She held his gaze. I wasn't telling you. I was advising. For the first time, Langley had nothing to say. Footsteps echoed up the jet bridge. Measured, professional. The sound of people who did not need to hurry because time was already on their side. Briggs felt his pulse in his ears. He realized, with a clarity that made his hands go cold, that whatever came next would not be controlled by rank or volume or habit. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again as the cabin door latch turned. This was only the beginning. The door opened without drama. No sirens, no shouting. Just the low hydraulic sigh and the smell of wet concrete drifting into the cabin. Two people stepped aboard. A woman in a navy raincoat carrying a leather portfolio, and a man with silver hair, no coat, no umbrella, his suit darkened at the shoulders by rain. They moved with the unhurried confidence of people who were never questioned about why they were there. Captain Briggs felt something in his chest loosen and tighten at the same time. He recognized the woman immediately. Corporate counsel. He had seen her once before, years ago, at a safety conference where she had spoken softly and dismantled a pilot twice her size with nothing but policy and timing. The man behind her was unfamiliar. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Calm eyes. No visible security, no badge. Just a presence that made the air in the cabin feel denser. Good evening, the woman said. Captain Briggs, I'm Ellen Pierce, Senior Legal Counsel for Meridian Flight Group. This is Daniel Whitaker. Langley straightened, relief flickering across his face. Finally. He stepped forward. Thank God you're here. The situation has gotten completely out of control. Pierce didn't look at him. Captain, she said, we've been monitoring the situation remotely. We're here to ask a few questions. Briggs nodded quickly. Of course. I've been trying to resolve a compliance issue with a passenger who refuses to cooperate. Pierce glanced toward Naomi. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. She looked back at Briggs. Before we proceed, I need to confirm that no physical contact has occurred. No, Briggs said. Nothing like that. Good. Pierce turned to Naomi. Ms. Carter, is that correct? Naomi inclined her head. Yes. Thank you for your patience, Pierce said. We'll speak shortly. Langley let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He leaned toward Whittaker. I assume you're here to clear this up so we can get moving. Whittaker looked at him then. Really looked. His gaze lingered just long enough to be uncomfortable. I'm here to understand why a chartered aircraft under corporate contract was held at the gate due to a discretionary action taken without documented cause. Langley frowned. Discretionary action? Captain, tell him. Briggs cleared his throat. There was a clearance hold triggered by a late addition to the manifest. Whittaker nodded slowly. And that hold was confirmed by dispatch? Initially flagged, Briggs said, then escalated. Escalated by whom? Whittaker asked. Briggs hesitated. Corporate operations. Captain Briggs, at 8:47 in the evening, dispatch notified you of a pending legal review and advised you to pause further passenger directives. At 9:03, you continued to pressure Ms. Carter to deplane. Is that correct? Briggs felt heat crawl up his neck. I was maintaining operational order. Pierce looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Operational order does not supersede a legal hold. Langley stepped in. This is absurd. I'm the primary charter client on this flight. My schedule matters. Whittaker finally smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Langley, your schedule has been noted. So has your intervention in cockpit authority. Langley bristled. Intervention? I was addressing an inconvenience. Whittaker nodded. Of course you were. Naomi watched the exchange quietly. She noticed how Briggs's shoulders had begun to sag, just slightly. How the certainty that had filled him earlier was leaking away, replaced by calculation. She had seen this before. The moment when power realized it might have misread the room. Pierce closed her portfolio. Miss Carter, may I speak with you privately? Naomi nodded. They stepped a few feet away, near the front row, close enough to be seen, but not heard clearly. Pierce lowered her voice. You understand that initiating a compliance review on a live charter is an unusual step. Naomi met her gaze. I do. And you understand the risk. Yes. Pierce studied her face. Not for guilt, for resolve. Why now? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She thought of the email she had received 3 days earlier. Anonymous, carefully worded. A warning disguised as a suggestion. She thought of the name that had appeared twice in different reports, years apart. Briggs. Because patterns don't change unless they're interrupted, she said finally. Pierce's eyes flickered. She nodded once. Understood. Whittaker cleared his throat. Ellen, if you're ready. Pierce turned back to Briggs. Captain, pending review. You are instructed to cease further interaction with Ms. Carter. First Officer Reynolds will assume interim cabin coordination. Briggs stared at her. You're sidelining me. Pierce's voice remained even. Temporarily. Langley laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. Whittaker turned to him. Mr. Langley, I'm going to ask you to return to your seat. Langley's jaw dropped. On what authority? Whittaker held his gaze. On mine. There was a silence then. Thick. Heavy. The kind that pressed on the ears. Langley looked around, searching for support. He found none. The other passengers had retreated into stillness, eyes down, pretending not to watch while missing nothing. Fine, Langley snapped. But this delay will be addressed. Whittaker inclined his head. Everything will be addressed. Langley turned away, shoulders stiff, walking back to his seat with the brittle dignity of a man unused to resistance. Briggs remained where he was. "Captain Pierce," he said, "I've flown for this company for decades." Pierce met his eyes. "I know. I've never had a mark on my record." Pierce's voice softened just slightly. "Tonight isn't about your record. It's about your judgment." That word again. Judgment. Briggs felt its weight settle over him. He glanced at Naomi, who stood quietly, hands clasped, eyes steady. He wondered, too late, what he had mistaken for weakness. Whitaker stepped closer to Naomi. "Miss Carter, thank you for your restraint." She looked at him. "I wasn't being restrained. I was being patient." Whitaker's lips twitched. "Fair enough." From the cockpit, the first officer's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are awaiting final clearance from operations. We will update you shortly." The cabin exhaled as one. Outside, the rain had stopped. The runway lights reflected clean and sharp, no longer blurred. Time had shifted, subtly, decisively. Briggs watched as Pierce and Whitaker spoke quietly near the door. He realized that, whatever story he had been telling himself about this night, it was no longer the one being written. Naomi took her seat again. She felt the eyes on her, different now, curious, cautious, measuring. She rested her hands in her lap, breathing slow, and waited. The real questions were about to begin. The waiting became its own kind of pressure. Not loud, not frantic, just the steady awareness that something irreversible was unfolding in small, procedural steps. The kind of steps that never made headlines, but changed lives all the same. Captain Briggs sat in the jump seat now, not by choice, but by instruction. His hands rested on his knees, fingers spread, as if grounding himself. He had not been told to leave the cockpit. He had not been relieved. Yet. The ambiguity gnawed at him more than a direct order ever could. For 38 years, he had understood his place in the hierarchy of things. Tonight, that hierarchy had tilted, just enough to make him dizzy. In the cabin, voices stayed low. No one slept. People pretended to read, pretended to check emails that were already drafted and redrafted in their minds. Victor Langley sat rigid in his seat, jacket unbuttoned now, leg bouncing despite his effort to still it. Every few seconds he glanced toward the front, measuring the distance between himself and the woman he still refused to understand. Naomi Carter felt the shift before anyone spoke. The way the air seemed to thicken again, the subtle change in posture from the legal counsel standing near the door. Ellen Pierce closed her portfolio, not with finality, but with intent. Daniel Whitaker stepped aside to give her space, the way men did when they understood a decision had already been made elsewhere. "Captain Briggs," Pierce said, her voice carrying without being raised. "We've completed the initial review." Briggs straightened immediately. "Yes, ma'am." Langley leaned forward. "Does that mean we can get airborne?" Pierce ignored him. "Captain," she continued, "this review is preliminary. However, based on dispatch logs, recorded cockpit communications, and witness statements from cabin crew, there is sufficient cause to initiate a formal conduct assessment." Briggs felt his throat tighten. Conduct assessment. "This does not constitute termination," Pierce said, anticipating the fear before it could surface. "But, effective immediately, you are relieved of command for this flight." The words landed cleanly, precise. There was no drama in them, no anger, which somehow made them worse. Langley stood. "You can't be serious. Harold, tell her this is insane." Briggs didn't move. He couldn't. His vision tunneled, narrowing to the pattern in the carpet, the faint scuff mark near his shoe that he hadn't noticed before. He had always imagined losing command would feel explosive, a shouting match, a confrontation. Instead, it felt like being quietly erased. "Who will fly the aircraft?" Langley demanded. Pierce turned her head just enough to acknowledge him. "A reserve captain has already been dispatched from the crew hotel. Estimated arrival time is 15 minutes. 15 minutes, Langley repeated, incredulous. "I have a transatlantic connection window." "Mr. Langley," Whitaker said evenly, "this flight is no longer operating on your timeline." That finally did it. Langley laughed, sharp and bitter. "And whose timeline is it on now?" He looked around, then pointed openly now at Naomi. "Hers?" Every eye in the cabin shifted to her. Naomi felt the weight of it settle across her shoulders. She remained seated. She did not look away. "No," she said. "It's on the company's timeline." Langley scoffed. "You keep saying that like it means something." Naomi stood slowly. Not to confront him, not to dominate the space, simply to remove the illusion that she was smaller than the moment required. "It means something because I'm responsible for what happens next," she said. There it was. Not shouted, not framed as a threat, just stated. Briggs looked up sharply. For the first time since the review began, he truly looked at her, not as a problem, not as an inconvenience, as a variable he had failed to account for. "Responsible how?" Langley snapped. Whitaker answered instead. "Ms. Carter is serving as interim principal under a sealed transfer agreement executed earlier this week." The words rippled through the cabin, quiet but electric. Sealed transfer. Interim principal. The language of boardrooms, not boarding passes. Langley's face drained of color. "That's not funny." Pierce finally looked at him directly. "No one here is joking, Mr. Langley." Naomi met Briggs's eyes. She saw the storm there now. Not rage, something older. Fear mixed with disbelief. The slow realization that the rules he had enforced might finally be enforced on him. "I didn't come here to make a point," Naomi said, her voice steady, audible to everyone now. "I came here because I needed to see how power behaved when it thought no one important was watching." Langley shook his head. "This is unbelievable." "Is it?" Naomi asked quietly. Simons answered her. From the jet bridge came the sound of approaching footsteps again. Faster this time, purposeful. A woman's voice carried faintly, confident, asking directions she already knew the answer to. The reserve captain stepped into view moments later. Early 60s, calm eyes, hair pulled back. She wore her uniform like it belonged to her, not the other way around. "Captain Elaine Morris," she said, extending a hand to Pierce. "I understand I'm needed." Pierce took it. "Thank you for coming on short notice." Morris glanced at Briggs. No judgment, no sympathy, just acknowledgement. Then her eyes found Naomi. "Ms. Carter." Naomi inclined her head. "Captain." The exchange was brief, respectful, complete. Langley sank back into his seat, suddenly aware of how alone he was. Briggs remained standing, unsure what to do with his hands now that they no longer held authority. "Captain Briggs," Pierce said, "you are instructed to gather your personal items and remain available for follow-up questioning upon arrival." Upon arrival, not if. Briggs nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." As he turned toward the cockpit for the last time that night, Naomi watched him. She felt no triumph, only the heavy understanding that systems did not fail all at once. They failed because people were allowed to misuse them, quietly, repeatedly, until someone refused to look away. The cabin door closed again. The rain did not return. Outside, the engines began their slow, deliberate spool, not under Briggs's command, but under something far more enduring. Accountability. The engine settled into a steady hum, deeper now, more deliberate. Not the eager whine of departure, but the patient breathing of a machine waiting for permission. The cabin lights brightened slightly, just enough to reset the room. People shifted, straightened. Lives rearranged themselves in small, unconscious ways. Captain Elaine Morris moved with quiet efficiency. She didn't announce herself. She didn't perform authority. She embodied it. Her hands brushed the seat backs as she passed, grounding herself in the space, eyes scanning faces not to judge, but to register. When she reached the cockpit, she paused, one hand resting on the frame, and looked back. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice calm, practiced, warm without being familiar. "Thank you for your patience. We will be departing shortly. I appreciate your cooperation this evening." No applause, no relief laughter, just a collective exhale. Captain Briggs stood near the forward bulkhead, flight bag at his feet. He had packed it slowly, carefully, folding habits into compartments that suddenly felt heavier than they should. 38 years reduced to zippers and checklists. He had expected someone to say something to him, to accuse, to comfort. No one did. Naomi watched him from her seat. She noticed the way his shoulders had curved inward, as if gravity had increased around him alone. She wondered, briefly, who he had been before the uniform, before the rules bent around him, before being listened to had become automatic. Victor Langley stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped near his temple. He had made 3 calls already, each one shorter than the last, each one ending with silence on the other end. Power, Naomi knew, was loud right up until it wasn't. Ellen Pierce returned to her seat, but did not relax. Legal counsel never did. She opened her portfolio again, reviewing notes, marking times. Everything mattered now. Not because of spectacle, but because memory was fragile and truth depended on documentation. Daniel Whitaker leaned back, hands folded, eyes closed. He looked almost bored, but Naomi knew better. He was listening. He always listened. That was why she trusted him. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Naomi felt the slight shift beneath her feet. The movement was subtle, but it carried weight. The past did not disappear when the wheels rolled. It followed, quietly, patiently. The first bump of turbulence came sooner than expected. Nothing dramatic, just enough to rattle the glassware and tighten grips. A reminder that control was never absolute. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. Images surfaced unbidden. A younger version of herself, standing in a glass-walled office, being told she was impressive but not quite ready. A boardroom table where her voice had been the last to be heard, if at all. The long, slow work of learning when to push and when to wait. She opened her eyes as Captain Morris's voice came over the intercom again. "We'll be cruising at altitude shortly. If anyone requires assistance, please let the crew know." A flight attendant approached Naomi's row. It was the same woman from earlier, younger than Naomi had first guessed, early 30s, eyes tired but alert. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "may I get you something?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Water would be nice, thank you." The attendant nodded, relief flickering across her face. As she turned away, Naomi saw her straighten just a little, like someone who had been holding their breath for too long. Behind Naomi, a man leaned toward his wife and whispered something she couldn't hear. The wife nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. People were reprocessing, rewriting the story they would tell themselves later, about what they had seen, about what they had missed. Victor Langley stood abruptly. He made it 2 steps into the aisle before Whitaker's voice stopped him. "Mr. Langley." Langley turned, irritation flaring. What now? Whitaker gestured toward the seat. "Sit down." "On what grounds?" Langley snapped. On the grounds that this flight has had enough disruption, Whitaker said evenly. And you've said enough for one evening. Langley looked around, searching for allies. Found none. He dropped back into his seat, chest heaving. You think this ends here? He muttered. Naomi turned in her seat just enough to face him. It never ends where people think it does, she said. It just keeps going quieter. Langley scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. He looked suddenly older, smaller, a man who had confused access with importance for too long. The hours passed. The Atlantic stretched beneath them, dark and indifferent. Somewhere over open water, the cabin lights dimmed again. People slept, or pretended to. Thoughts turned inward. Briggs remained awake. He stared at the emergency exit sign, glowing softly, and replayed the night in fragments. The first look, the assumption, the confidence that had felt so earned. He saw now how thin it had been, how conditional. He thought of the first time he had been called captain, how it had felt like becoming someone else, someone bigger. He wondered when that someone had stopped listening. As dawn began to break near the horizon, Naomi felt the fatigue settle in her bones. Not just physical, the deeper kind. The kind that came from holding space for truth while others resisted it. She pulled a notebook from her bag, old habit. Pen to paper steadied her. She wrote a single sentence, then crossed it out. Wrote another, slower, more deliberate. This wasn't about winning. It never had been. It was about what happened next. When the cabin lights brightened for descent, Captain Morris spoke again. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please return to your seats and ensure your belongings are stowed. The runway lights appeared through the window, sharp and unwavering. The wheels touched down smoothly, controlled, certain. As the aircraft taxied, Ellen Pierce closed her portfolio one final time. She glanced at Naomi. Just a brief look. Respect. Acknowledgement. Nothing more needed. When the plane came to a stop, Naomi remained seated for a moment longer. She watched as Briggs lifted his bag, preparing to leave under supervision. She didn't meet his eyes. There was nothing left to say. Victor Langley stood too quickly, then stopped himself. He looked around, aware now of how he was seen. He adjusted his jacket, a gesture that fooled no one. The door opened. Cool air rushed in. Morning light spilled across the cabin, unforgiving and clear. Naomi stood. She moved with the quiet assurance of someone who had nothing left to prove. As she stepped into the aisle, the flight attendant caught her eye again. "Thank you," the woman whispered. Naomi paused. "For what?" "For not looking away," the attendant said. Naomi nodded once, then she walked forward, into the light, carrying with her the weight of what had been revealed, and the knowledge that the hardest part was never the confrontation. It was what came after. And this was only the beginning. London greeted them with a low grey ceiling and the smell of wet pavement. Morning traffic moved like a tired animal beyond the terminal glass, all patience worn thin. Inside the jet bridge, the air was cooler, sharper, official. The kind of air that turned private moments into records. Naomi stepped off the aircraft last, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She watched the flow of bodies ahead of her, the way people carried themselves after a night like that. Some hurried, eager to escape the memory. Some slowed, still processing the quiet violence of what they had witnessed. She saw shoulders squared, heads lowered, eyes flicking back once, then away. At the base of the jet bridge, two men waited with badges clipped to their belts and folders tucked under their arms. They didn't block her path. They didn't raise a hand. They simply stood where she could see them, where choice was acknowledged, even as procedure took over. "Ms. Carter," one of them said. His voice was polite, practiced. We'll need a few minutes of your time. Naomi nodded. Of course. Captain Briggs exited behind her, escorted but not restrained. He looked smaller in the open space of the terminal, his uniform suddenly too stiff, too bright. He didn't look at Naomi. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, as if the floor itself required his full attention. Victor Langley appeared moments later, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. When he saw the badges, he stopped mid-sentence. The call ended without goodbye. For the first time since boarding, he looked uncertain. The confidence he wore so easily had slipped, revealing the raw mechanics underneath. Daniel Whitaker stepped up beside Naomi. You all right? She considered the question. Physically, yes. Emotionally, she wasn't sure yet. I will be, she said. He nodded, accepting the answer without pushing. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. He understood timing, understood that some truths needed room to breathe. They were led to a small conference room off the terminal corridor. No windows, neutral carpet, a pot of coffee that smelled burnt and old. Ellen Pierce was already there, jacket folded neatly over the back of a chair, sleeves rolled up. She looked tired now, the kind of tired that came after the adrenaline faded. This won't take long, Pierce said. We just need to establish sequence. Sequence mattered. Naomi knew that. Sequence was how narratives were built, how Blaine moved or stuck. They asked questions. Naomi answered. Not defensively, not expansively. She stuck to what she had seen, what she had heard, what she had done. She described the tone of Briggs's voice, the timing of the hold, the exact words Langley had used. She watched as pens moved, as timestamps were noted, as her experience became data. At one point, one of the investigators paused. Ms. Carter, he said, do you believe Captain Briggs intended to discriminate? Naomi didn't answer right away. She thought of the look on Briggs's face when authority slipped from his hands, of the certainty that had preceded it. I believe he never questioned whether he was allowed to decide who belonged, she said. And that matters more than intent. The man nodded slowly and wrote something down. When it was over, Pierce closed her folder and exhaled. That was clean, she said. Thank you. Naomi stood. Outside, voices echoed down the corridor. Announcements, rolling luggage, life resuming. What happens now? Naomi asked. Pierce met her eyes. Now, the system does what it's supposed to do. Slowly, imperfectly, in public. Naomi almost smiled. They parted near security. Whitaker disappeared into a call. Pierce was pulled aside by a man with a pin on his lapel. Naomi found herself alone for the first time since boarding. She walked toward the exit, steps measured, bag light on her shoulder. The terminal opened up ahead, glass walls framing a city that did not care who she was or what she had done the night before. That anonymity felt earned. Outside, a car waited, driver in a dark coat, door already open. Naomi paused before getting in. She looked back once, toward the terminal doors. Through the glass, she saw Briggs again. Seated now, hands clasped. An official speaking to him in low tones. No shouting, no spectacle. Just the slow, grinding process of consequence. She felt something then. Not satisfaction, not anger. A quiet sadness, heavy and unglamorous. She had not come to London to unmake a man. She had come to see the truth. And the truth, once seen, demanded response. The car pulled into traffic. The city unfolded around her. Brick and steel. History layered on top of itself. Naomi rested her head against the window and closed her eyes. Her phone buzzed. A message from the board liaison. We need to talk. Press is circling. Another from her assistant. The committee wants a statement. She typed back slowly. Not yet. Give it time. She watched the Thames slide past, grey and steady. Thought of the flight attendant's whispered thanks, of Captain Morris's calm competence, of Langley's shrinking certainty, of Briggs's silence. By the time the car reached her hotel, Naomi knew what she would say when the time came. Not a condemnation, not a victory lap. Something quieter, something harder to ignore. Up in her room, she set her bag down and stood by the window. The city hummed below. She pulled out her notebook again and opened to a clean page. She wrote until her hand cramped. Wrote about systems and people, about power that mistook habit for right, about the cost of looking away, about responsibility that did not end when the plane landed. When she finished, the page was full. No slogans, no accusations, just clarity. Naomi closed the notebook and set it aside. She poured herself a glass of water and drank it slowly. Outside, church bells rang the hour. Time moved on, indifferent and relentless. Somewhere across the ocean, a process had begun, one that would not be quick or neat, one that would test the patience of everyone involved. Naomi stood there, watching the city breathe, and understood something she had known all along. The hardest part was never taking power. It was deciding how to use it when no one was watching anymore. The press did not arrive all at once. It never did. It seeped in through side doors and quiet calls, through familiar names asking careful questions that were anything but casual. By mid-morning, Naomi's phone vibrated every few minutes, each buzz another reminder that silence, too, was a statement. She ignored it at first. She stood by the window and watched London move. Buses breathing diesel. Pedestrians folded into coats against the damp air. A city that had seen power rise and fall so often it had learned to keep walking either way. At 10:15 in the morning, the knock came. Firm, professional, the kind that assumed permission had already been granted. Naomi opened the door to find Daniel Whittaker standing in the hallway, tie loosened, jacket over his arm. His face was composed, but his eyes were alert. Behind him, a woman Naomi recognized from the boardroom waited, tablet tucked against her chest. "We have a problem," Whittaker said, without preamble. Naomi stepped aside. "Come in." They didn't sit. Whittaker paced once, then stopped. "Someone leaked a partial version of last night. Not video, audio, out of context." Naomi felt her stomach tighten. "What part?" "The part where Briggs invokes command authority, and Langley's comments before counsel arrived." She closed her eyes briefly. "Whose leak?" "We don't know yet," Whittaker said, "but it's gaining traction, framed as a clash between passenger privilege and pilot autonomy." Naomi opened her eyes. "That's convenient." The woman with the tablet cleared her throat. "Social media is running with it. Cable picked it up an hour ago. The narrative is already drifting." Naomi walked back to the window. She could see the Thames from here, a dull ribbon threading through concrete and memory. "Let it drift," she said. Whittaker turned. "Naomi, if you don't respond, others will respond for you." "I know," she said, "but not yet." He studied her. "You're sure?" She nodded. "People need to sit with discomfort before they're handed an explanation." The woman hesitated. "The board is anxious." Naomi smiled faintly. "The board always is." They left a few minutes later. Naomi locked the door behind them and leaned against it, letting the quiet settle again. She felt the pull now, the familiar tug between control and restraint. She had learned long ago that timing was not about speed. It was about readiness. Across town, Victor Langley watched his name crawl across a television screen he had not turned on. He sat in a private lounge he no longer felt comfortable in, collar loosened, glass untouched. The anchor's voice was smooth, concerned. Words like charter ethics and corporate review floated past him like smoke. His phone rang. He didn't answer it. He knew who it was. He had built his life on proximity, to influence, to decision-makers, to rooms where things happened. Last night, for the first time, proximity had failed him. He had been present and irrelevant at the same time. The realization sat heavy in his chest. He stood abruptly and left, coat forgotten on the chair. The staff watched him go without expression. They had learned that powerful men passed through like weather. Back at the airport, Captain Briggs sat in a small office that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. He had answered the same questions twice already. Dates, phrases, intentions. Each repetition stripped something away. Not dignity. He had lost that earlier. Certainty. He stared at his hands, now bare of insignia. He had removed the stripes himself, folded them carefully into his bag. The gesture felt ceremonial, though no one had asked for it. An investigator closed her notebook. "Captain Briggs," she said, "this process will take time." Briggs nodded. He had nothing but time now. "Do you understand why we're here?" she asked. He hesitated. Then, quietly, "Yes." "Why?" He swallowed. "Because I thought my judgment was neutral. And it wasn't." The investigator watched him for a long moment. Then she stood. "We'll be in touch." Left alone, Briggs leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. He thought of every time he had spoken without listening. Every time he had assumed compliance meant agreement. He wondered how many moments like last night had gone unrecorded. He wondered how many more had ended differently. By early afternoon, Naomi's silence had done its work. Speculation grew sloppy. Contradictions surfaced. Commentators talked over one another, filling gaps with noise. The story widened beyond the aircraft, touching old nerves, race, authority, accountability. Words that made people defensive before they made them thoughtful. At 3:30, Naomi's phone rang again. This time, she answered. "Yes," she said. It was Ellen Pierce. "We're ready when you are." Naomi closed her eyes. "Then let's do it properly." An hour later, Naomi stood in a modest conference room, cameras aligned at respectful distance. No dramatic backdrop, no slogans, just a table, a glass of water, and her notebook placed deliberately to one side. She waited until the room settled, until the murmurs faded, until the red light stopped blinking and held steady. "Good evening," she said. "Thank you for being here." Her voice was calm, measured. It did not ask for permission. Last night, on a chartered flight bound for London, a situation unfolded that raised important questions about authority, judgment, and responsibility. I was present. I did not intervene immediately. That was intentional. Pens paused, heads tilted. I wanted to observe how systems behave when they believe no one with power is watching. A ripple moved through the room. Not shock, recognition. "This is not a story about a single pilot or a single passenger," Naomi continued. "It is about habits that form when accountability is assumed rather than practiced. About the difference between rules and discretion. And about who pays the price when that difference is ignored." She did not name Briggs. She did not name Langley. She did not need to. The story no longer belonged to individuals. It belonged to a pattern. "An investigation is underway," she said. "It will proceed without interference from me or anyone else at my direction. That matters." A reporter raised a hand. "Ms. Carter, are you saying this was a test?" Naomi shook her head. "No. I'm saying it was a mirror. Another question followed. Will anyone be fired? Naomi paused. Consequences are not performances. They are processes, and they should be handled as such. Silence fell again. Different this time. Heavier. More deliberate. When the conference ended, Naomi did not linger. She stepped away from the cameras and into a quiet hallway, heart steady, breath even. She had said what needed to be said. No more, no less. That evening, as the city darkened and the day finally loosened its grip, Naomi returned to her room. She stood once more at the window, lights reflected faintly in the glass. Her phone buzzed with a final message from the flight attendant. Just 3 words. Thank you again. Naomi set the phone down and let the quiet take her. Outside, London breathed. Inside, something settled. The story would continue. Investigations always did. Opinions would harden, lines would be drawn. But somewhere, a line had already shifted, subtle and real. And for the first time since boarding that plane, Naomi allowed herself to rest. Not because it was over, but because it had truly begun. Morning came without ceremony. No headlines waiting outside the door, no protesters. Just light creeping through the curtains, and the distant sound of traffic reminding Naomi that the world did not pause for moral reckonings. She woke before the alarm, the way she always did after a night that mattered. Her body remembered tension, even when her mind tried to move on. She lay still for a moment, listening to the room settle. Then she got up. By 8:30, she was in a smaller conference room 2 floors below, coffee untouched, notebook open. The people around the table arrived one by one. Not the full board, not the cameras, just the ones who would do the work when attention drifted elsewhere. Ellen Pierce took the seat to Naomi's right. Daniel Whitaker sat across from them, jacket off, sleeves rolled. 2 operations directors joined remotely, faces framed by office windows and early fatigue. No one spoke at first. Let's start with facts, Naomi said finally. Calm, grounded, no preamble. Pierce nodded. Preliminary findings indicate Captain Briggs violated internal conduct guidelines related to discretionary authority. Not criminal, but serious. Whitaker leaned forward. The question isn't whether he broke a rule. It's whether the rule was clear enough to stop him from believing he could. That landed. Naomi wrote something down. One of the directors cleared his throat. The flight attendant submitted a written statement this morning. She describes a pattern, not overt abuse, pressure, tone, assumptions, patterns again. Naomi closed her pen. This isn't about one man, she said. It never was. It's about what we've normalized because it felt efficient. Pierce studied her. What are you proposing? Naomi looked around the table. A pause. She let it stretch. She had learned that people revealed themselves in silence. I want an independent review of command discretion policies across the fleet. Not just what's written, how it's taught, how it's enforced, and how it's protected. Protected how? One director asked. Protected from being used as a shield, Naomi said. For bias, for convenience, for ego. Whitaker nodded slowly. That will upset people. Naomi met his eyes. It should. Across the Atlantic, in a quiet suburb of New Jersey, Captain Briggs sat at his kitchen table with a mug of coffee he had reheated twice and still hadn't finished. The house felt unfamiliar in daylight, too quiet, too honest. His wife moved through the room without speaking, the way people did when they didn't know which version of you they were allowed to address, the man who had worn the uniform or the one who had come home without it. He had not slept much. He kept replaying the moment Naomi had spoken. Not the reveal, the calm, the certainty that had not needed volume. He opened his laptop, the screen filled with messages he hadn't read, some from colleagues, carefully worded, some from people he barely remembered flying with once, others not so careful. He closed the laptop again. He thought of the investigator's question, "Do you understand why we're here?" He had said yes, but understanding, he was learning, was not the same as accepting. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, a delivery truck idled. A neighbor waved. Normal life continued, indifferent to the collapse of a career that had felt permanent. For the first time in years, Briggs felt unmoored. Not angry, not defensive, just stripped of the framework that had told him who he was. In London, Victor Langley sat in a private dining room he had reserved out of habit rather than need. His plate remained untouched. He stared at the city through the window, jaw tight. The calls had stopped coming, not dramatically, just fewer, shorter. His assistant had used the word recalibration in a message that felt like a warning. He had always believed he could outrun consequences by staying ahead of them. Last night had taught him that sometimes consequences waited quietly, letting you arrive first. He reached for his phone, scrolled, stopped at Naomi's name, considered, then set the phone down again. Some doors, he sensed, did not reopen once closed. Back in the conference room, the meeting shifted from diagnosis to design. Timelines, oversight, language, not slogans, systems. One director hesitated. "This will cost us time, money, goodwill with certain clients." Naomi leaned back slightly. "Then we'll find out which clients were only here because they thought no one would ever say no." No one argued. The meeting ended without drama. People gathered their things, already thinking about the work ahead. Naomi stayed behind for a moment, alone again with her notebook. She turned to a fresh page and wrote a single line at the top. "Authority without accountability is not leadership." She closed the notebook. That afternoon she walked. No driver, no security, just a coat and the city. She passed cafes, bookshops, construction sites. She watched people argue and reconcile and pass each other without knowing anything about the decisions being made above them. A man on a bench argued loudly into his phone. A woman pushed a stroller with one hand and held a coffee with the other. Life pressed on, unbothered by corporate reform. That grounded her. Her phone buzzed once more. A message from Pierce. "FAA liaison wants a preliminary statement. Not for press, for record," Naomi replied simply. "I'll send it tonight." As evening fell, she returned to her room and opened her notebook again. This time she wrote carefully, each word placed. No blame, no theatre, just clarity. She wrote about responsibility that extended beyond titles, about trust that had to be earned daily, about systems that worked only when people were willing to examine themselves inside them. She finished and sent it. Across the ocean, Briggs sat at the same table, light dimming outside, coffee finally cold. His phone buzzed. A message from the union representative. Neutral, procedural, no promises. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he typed a reply. "I'm available." It was the first honest sentence he had written all day. As night settled over London, Naomi closed the curtains and turned off the light. She lay in the dark, eyes open, listening to the city breathe. She knew the story would keep unfolding, in reports, in hearings, and quiet shifts in behavior that no one would credit to one night on a plane. That was fine. Change, she had learned, rarely announced itself. It showed up later, in who hesitated, in who asked questions, in who no longer assumed. And somewhere in that slow recalibration, something important had already begun to move. The first hearing was not held in a courtroom. It took place in a windowless conference room near Dulles. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, the kind of place designed to strip emotion from memory. That, Naomi knew, was intentional. Institutions preferred neutrality when reckoning with themselves. Captain Briggs sat at the long table, suit instead of uniform, hands folded, posture careful. He had shaved. He looked older without the stripes. Smaller, too. Across from him sat 3 panel members, all former pilots, all men who had once worn the same weight on their shoulders and understood exactly how intoxicating it could be. "This is not a trial," the chair said. "It's a review of judgment." Briggs nodded. He did not argue. He had exhausted argument. They played audio, not the leak, the full context. His voice, calm at first, certain, then sharpened. He listened to himself as if hearing a stranger. He noticed things he hadn't before. The assumptions, the way he had filled silence with authority instead of curiosity. When it ended, the room stayed quiet. "Why didn't you step back?" one panelist asked. Briggs swallowed. "Because I didn't think I had to." That answer hung in the air, heavy, honest, damning. In another city, Victor Langley faced a different kind of reckoning. No panel, no formal questions, just closed doors that did not reopen, meetings postponed, invitations rescinded, a polite message from a longtime associate explaining that now was not the right moment. He stared at the email until the words blurred. Not anger, confusion. He had played by rules he thought were universal. He was learning they had been conditional. That evening, he attended a dinner he had once dominated. This time, conversation flowed around him, not to him. He spoke once, too loudly, and the table fell briefly silent before moving on. He felt invisible, in a way Naomi never had, because he had never learned how to survive it. Back in London, Naomi received updates in measured intervals. No dramatics, just progress. Interviews completed, policies under review, training modules flagged for revision. She read them late at night, glasses on, hair pulled back, city quiet outside. The work was slower now, less visible, more important. One message stopped her, from the flight attendant. "I testified today. I was scared, but they listened." Naomi closed her eyes. She pictured the young woman standing in a room like the one at Dulles, voice steady despite the cost. She typed back, "You did exactly what mattered." Weeks passed. The report was released on a Thursday morning. Not explosive, not viral, just thorough. It outlined failures of oversight, misuse of discretionary authority, cultural drift. Briggs's name appeared, but it was not centered. That mattered. The recommendation was suspension pending retraining, not permanent revocation. Some called it lenient, others called it fair. Naomi called it proportional. Briggs read the report alone at his kitchen table. He didn't skip ahead. He read every word. When he finished, he sat back and stared at the wall for a long time. He thought of flying, of the sky as something vast and indifferent. He wondered if he would ever be trusted with it again. He wasn't sure he deserved to be. In New Jersey, Langley read the same report in a different way, scanning, searching for names. His own appeared only once, in a footnote. Advisory. He felt the sting of it more than any accusation. He had been reduced to context. He closed the document and poured himself a drink, then didn't touch it. Across the Atlantic, Naomi stood before her board again. This time, the mood was quieter. No fear, no resistance, just resolve. "This is not a victory," she said. "It's a correction." They nodded. One director asked, "Will this protect us?" Naomi met his eyes. It will challenge us. Protection comes later. That afternoon, she walked past an airfield fence outside the city, watching planes lift into the sky one by one. Each ascent looked effortless from the ground. She knew better. Her phone buzzed with a final update for the day. Briggs accepted retraining. Langley withdrew from 2 boards. No public statements. Naomi slipped the phone into her pocket. Above her, a jet banked left, sunlight catching its wing. Controlled, measured, accountable. She stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of what had changed and what had not. The story was no longer hers alone, and that, she knew, was exactly how it should be. 6 months later, the rain returned to Morristown Municipal the same way it always had. Quiet at first, then steady, as if the sky were testing whether anyone still noticed patterns. Naomi Carter stepped out of the car without an umbrella. She liked the reminder. Rain flattened hierarchies. It treated everyone the same. The hangar doors were open, light spilling across the tarmac. Inside, the aircraft waited, newly repainted, the old insignia replaced by something simpler, cleaner. Naomi paused at the threshold, listening to the sounds she had come to recognize over the past months. Distant engines, muted voices, the rhythm of a place where work happened without ceremony. Captain Elaine Morris stood near the nose of the jet, reviewing a checklist with a young first officer. They spoke in low tones, efficient, unhurried. When Morris saw Naomi, she nodded once, respectful, unforced. No salutes, no performance, just acknowledgement. "Good morning," Morris said. "Morning," Naomi replied. The first officer glanced between them, curiosity flickering across his face, before discipline settled it back into neutrality. Naomi recognized the look. She remembered wearing it herself years ago, when she was learning how to exist in rooms that hadn't been built for her. Inside the cabin, the air felt different now. Not luxurious in the old way, intentional. The materials were the same, but the atmosphere had shifted. The quiet was no longer purchased. It was maintained. A flight attendant approached, older than the one from that night, with streaks of grey at her temples, and a confidence that came from having survived several versions of the industry. "Miss Carter," she said, "we're ready when you are." Naomi nodded. "Thank you." She took her seat, not at the front, not at the back, somewhere in the middle, where perspective stayed honest. She rested her hands on her knees and breathed in slowly. The memory surfaced, uninvited, of another cabin, another night, another silence stretched too tight. She let it pass. Outside, a shuttle bus rolled by, carrying a small crew from a regional cargo carrier. The bus stopped briefly near the fence line. A man stepped down to adjust a loose strap on a duffel bag. He moved carefully now, deliberately. The posture of someone who had learned the cost of haste. Naomi recognized him before he looked up. Captain Briggs had lost weight. His hair was shorter. No uniform. Just a high-visibility vest and work boots worn soft at the edges. When he straightened, their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, the world narrowed to that line of sight. Briggs froze. Not out of fear, out of recognition. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't look away either. She gave him a small nod. Nothing more, nothing less. Briggs hesitated, then returned it, awkward but sincere. There was no bitterness in his expression now, no entitlement, just a quiet understanding of where he stood in relation to the sky. The bus pulled away. The moment passed. Naomi exhaled. Inside the cockpit, Morris called back to the cabin. "Doors closing." The engine spooled, smooth and controlled. Naomi felt the familiar vibration beneath her feet, different from before. Not because the machine had changed, but because the people around it had. As the jet lifted off, Naomi looked out the window. The ground receded. Lines softened. The world rearranged itself into patterns again. She thought of the report, now archived, of the policies rewritten in plain language, of the training sessions that had been uncomfortable and necessary, of the flight attendants who spoke more freely now, of the pilots who hesitated before issuing commands, not out of weakness, but awareness. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Naomi opened her notebook. The pages were thinner now, filled with smaller handwriting, fewer declarations, more observations. She wrote a sentence, then another. Not for press, not for boards, for herself. Power, she wrote, is not proven by how quickly people move when you speak. It is proven by how carefully they listen when you do. She closed the notebook. Across the aisle, a man in his 70s adjusted his glasses and leaned toward his wife. He whispered something. She smiled and squeezed his hand. Naomi caught fragments. Reminds me of how flying used to feel. Safer. The comment settled in her chest, heavy and warm. Hours later, as the cabin lights dimmed, Naomi allowed herself to rest. Not sleep. Rest. The kind that came when vigilance loosened, but didn't disappear. She dreamed of water and motion and open skies. When the plane touched down in California at dusk, the landing was smooth, unremarkable, exactly as it should be. As passengers disembarked, Naomi remained seated until the aisle cleared. The older flight attendant paused beside her. Carter, she said quietly. Thank you for what you did. Not just that night. After. Naomi met her eyes. Thank you for staying, she replied. Outside, the air was dry and warm, different from New Jersey, different from London. The car waited. The next meeting. The next decision. The work never ended. It simply changed shape. As Naomi stepped into the evening, she felt the familiar weight settle again. Responsibility. Not as burden, as choice. She glanced once more at the aircraft, its lights glowing against the darkening sky. Then she turned away and walked forward, steady, unhurried, knowing that stories like this never truly concluded. They echoed, in policies, in pauses, in the quiet decisions people made when they thought no one important was watching. If this story stayed with you, like it did with them, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.